Right, yeah, this is my second video blog, well, technically my third, I guess, video entry on codename Dispossessed, yes. And on this one I'll be talking about the script and stuff like that. These will be two, it's kind of difficult because these, any kind of blog post, written or video, doesn't quite put across the amount of time that it takes to actually get stuff written and the amount of rehashing and creative process that you can't really put across in writing. But I think it took me about to get my first draft together. I think it took me about 3 weeks, and then another 2 weeks on top of that to get it polished off to the final draft. But that other 2 weeks was full of other pre-production stuff, so things like shot lists and storyboards and stuff like that. But I'll be posting those up. I'll probably post up my the stuff that's been in my notebook. I'll post that up in a PDF or something like that, like scan all the files in so you can get an idea of some of my creative process and things like that, and what I've been up to with the project. So yeah, actually on that front, what I'll do is I'll read you out my first draft as it stood at the time. So yeah, I'll kind of that'll be the thing I do on this post, and then my second scripting post I'll show you the final draft so you can kind of pick and choose, kind of see how it's changed and stuff like that. So yeah, scripting is I'll talk about more sort of like what I've been up to with scripting and stuff like that. In terms of the process and stuff, what I've been sort of working off what I've learned from the last project, Albion, which I think, as I mentioned in my blog post on the last project, I did learn a great deal because it's the first time I'd ever done any proper scripting or anything like that. So I've since taken most of that knowledge, things about story structure and pacing and things like that, and tried to put it into account on this project so that it actually looks like I've learned something. So yeah, on that note, I think the big thing, the main things that I've been focusing on this time around is passing of time within the narrative. I don't want to make the mistake again of making things appear more trying to fit in too many events in a short space of time. So chances are this first 5 minutes is probably going to be over the space of a day, something like that. So maybe 2 or 3 scenes, so the afternoon and then the following morning, I think, is how it works at the moment. So yeah, so it's much more spread out that way, because another big thing as well is dialogue writing's come a lot easier this time around because of the nature of the piece. I've been focusing on less exposition and things like that, and literally just trying to put together character development for character development's sake, so we can see what the characters are trying to, what their aims are, what their sort of personalities are, how they're going to react later on in the series to higher stress situations. So that's going to be that's been an interesting process. Kind of the other thing as well is what I've done is, which has been a real help for me, and it's something that I'm probably going to carry on with in the future, is that I've been my method for creating characters and stuff like that, I'm not trying to build personalities out of thin air. What my main aim is, what my main process has been, I guess you could call it, is I've been basing the characters off people I know, like personality traits of my friends, my enemies, that kind of thing. So just sort of adding little bits, personality quirks and things like that, so we know what's how people are, and I can sort of base when I'm stuck for scripting and things like that, when I'm not sure, thinking how would this character react to this kind of situation. I can just look back, oh, well, they're based off so and so, like one of my mates, so they're going to, how would ex-friend react to this situation. So yeah, kind of, I'll do like a quick breakdown of the characters' personalities and everything like that. Like you've got, I guess, the main protagonist of the piece. Well, there's not strictly a specific protagonist because it's kind of spread fairly equally between Mark, Luke, and Paul. Although Paul probably comes more towards the role of an antagonist as the piece is going to go on, but obviously that's not going to become hugely clear in the first 3 minutes. But the way they are is Mark is kind of the he's very tightly strung, very sort of very wound up kind of character. Very I don't know. Sort of this. Probably subconsciously, the reason I named him Mark is he's got a lot of Mark Corrigan from Peep Show, David Mitchell's character. There's a lot of that in him, so there's kind of this sort of very tightly strung, highly wound, like viciously logical kind of approach to things. He's very easily upset by most situations, and very kind of precious, I guess you could call him. He's kind of if ever there's a situation in which someone's going to be annoyed or angry about something, Mark will always be that person who's angry and has risen to a situation that doesn't necessarily need to be risen to. If someone's trying to piss him off or something like that, you will always be able to get a rise out of him, basically. That's a little bit about who Mark is. Then there's Luke. Luke's kind of... he's an idiot, basically, Luke. Luke's kind of a bit of a sort of chronic dumbass. He's most of his actions and mannerisms and stuff like that is all very kind of slow and methodical, and he's not really thinking through what he's saying. Like, it's just sort of like I'm doing in these blog posts at the moment, just sprouting whatever comes into his head without much of an agenda to it or thought process. So, but even making those words come out, you can see in his character, you can see the cogs working, the mind's just steadily going chop, 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 working away. And so that's one side of his character. But he, in comparison to the other two, who each have their own more unpleasant personality quirks and stuff like that, Luke's fault, is that Luke is dumb. But on the flip side to that, he's probably the only one out of the three of them who is truly a good person to some extent. He's the moral one out of the three. He's the one who, if someone's upset or something like that, he would be the character who would go, "Are you alright, mate? Are you doing okay?" That kind of thing. So he's the nice guy, basically. He's the nice guy, but he's also an idiot, so he's very easily manipulated by Paul, who is the third character. Paul is... I've based Paul off kind of, he's sort of an amalgam of mine and a lot of my, and a few of my other friends' worst personality traits. He's a self-described alpha, if you will. Like, there's kind of, he sees himself as he's the one who's in charge of things. Like, he's not the, he's nobody's putz, basically. Like, he's going to be, even if it isn't really the case, he always thinks he's the smartest one in the room, he's the one who knows what to do, and everyone should sit and listen to what Paul has to say while he fucking pontificates about this and that and that. And he'll do things like, little personality quirks of his is he'll do things like, Mark will say something, and then, because in terms of intelligence-wise, those two are on fairly equal footing, Mark and Paul, but Paul isn't very keen on accepting that. Really, he wants to be the one who knows best and everything like that. So you'll often get sort of situations where Mark will say something which is a good idea, but the way he's said it, he's obviously been so highly strung and full of emotion and upset and full of rage about it that it allows Paul to just pretend to ignore what he said and then paraphrase it consciously or subconsciously and make that a big part of his character. He's best friends with Luke, and that's kind of one of the few nice parts of Paul's personality. One of the nicer parts of his personality is that he, on some level, they've got this kind of creepy, like kind of somewhere between like siblings, mentor, like Mr. Miyagi and what's his name, Karate Kid. That kind of combination. So there's something of like a mentoring role in there. There's a certain level of manipulation on kind of on a subtler level, but he's there when it counts for Luke, basically. But that's kind of, other than that being his nice part, he's also this is something that I've more developed over time. Like, it wasn't my original intention with Paul, and it's something that I hope to explore more if I carry on with the pieces. I want Paul to be very vicious. I want his personality to be, while underneath he comes across as a bit lazy and a bit kind of just your average Joe, really, like kind of likes to see himself in charge, but isn't necessarily the best suited to that situation. I think what I quite want more is Paul's going to be pushed more and more out of his comfort zone, and he's going to come more and more at odds with Mark, with the situation with Tony being in play as things carry on. We're going to see a much more vicious side to Paul, more vindictive and kind of cruel, and he will outwardly do things or put people into situations that will upset them in order to keep what he sees as the power balance in his favour. And I think that would be a really nice little personality quirk. It's nice to have someone who's not necessarily evil, if you will. Well, Tony's technically going to be evil. We'll see more about of Tony as if I carry on with the EMP. But I think it's nice to have that kind of antagonist. There's someone there who's, while they all antagonise each other in their own little way, Paul, if you had to pick someone as being unpleasant or not quite right, with some nasty social tics and stuff like that, we'll get that from Paul as opposed to anyone else, more so than anyone else in the group. But yeah, that's kind of the characters and stuff like that. I'll do a brief chat about how I want Tony to be. While he obviously doesn't really come across in this episode, because in this proof of concept, because in these first 5 minutes, I'll refer to real life Tony, which is Tony before the series started, so the normal guy, and then there's possessed Tony, which is the demon Tony. And the demon Tony is who we'll be dealing with throughout the series. We'll see more and more of, I think, little flashbacks of how Tony was before, because there's kind of the gag in my head is that who cares, Tony's a prick, basically. Like, kind of, they didn't like him. He was that housemate who bonded them all together on some level through a kind of a mutual hatred of this one guy. Whether he was necessarily an unpleasant person or he was just perceived as unpleasant by everyone else, his character is not really touched upon. And so Demon Tony, I think, kind of the way I'm imagining him in my head is he's not going to be kind of this, while he's going to adhere to a lot of the stereotypes and tropes that you've seen in movies like things like The Exorcist and stuff like that, silly things. It's going to be sort of riffing on pop culture. That's a big thing that I'm playing on throughout the piece, I think, like TV tropes and stuff like that. But the way I'm imagining Tony being in terms of things is he's not smarter, he's not dumber, he doesn't necessarily have special abilities or anything like that. The way Tony's going to be treated in the piece is Tony's going to be kind of almost like having a foreign exchange student come and stay with you or something like that. Someone who's got such completely different, like having an alien or something like that. Like, kind of, I use it as an example, like having a foreign exchange student, because there's different points of reference. But if you can expand that to the point of reference not being necessarily from a different culture, but being from an entirely different plane of existence, which is what I think would be an interesting thing to play on with Tony, because he'll be it's kind of bordering on sort of monster, but also at the same time a normal guy. They're playing Xbox with each other, that kind of thing, just living this normal life. And all Tony really wants, his only real ideal, is just to live on the earthly plane, not necessarily to cause anyone chaos or upset people, just to live on the earthly plane. That's his kind of thing, and just learn to live like a normal person. But in actual fact, he's going to get it wrong a lot. And that's my thought process with Tony. So yeah, while I did say I was going to be talking about the script in this one, I think this is probably enough for this first one. I'm just chatting about the characters and stuff like that. So I'll do a read through of the first draft of the script in the next post. So thank you.